Well, a very good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and I'm really pleased you're able to join us for this evening's BA Community webinar. Now, if you're anything like me and you've been looking at LinkedIn, the scale of change that's happening right now in the world is pretty obvious, not just from the news, but also from the number of people, and often really, really good people you see that have that sort of open for work, the new green sort of halo around their profile page. And so the session today is about that difficult situation that some of us, maybe you, me, others might find ourselves in either now or in future of being put either at risk of redundancy or being made redundant. And particularly in these difficult times we're in now, that might come as quite a shock to the system. So we're going to talk about all aspects of redundancy, from the emotional response, how you might feel, to practical techniques like how do you get your CV or resume up to scratch, and many, many, many more things beside. So I'm very pleased to say we have two expert panelists with us today. We have Michelle Shakesheff, who I've known for I don't know how many years, quite a few years, in various different roles. And Michelle, you now head up a team of BAs at Close Brothers, but you've led many, many teams of BAs. I know you're a sort of subject matter expert on various BCS panels. You're a long-standing member of the BA Manager Forum and have lots of expertise in that area, which is fantastic. We also have Simon Rookledge of Guidant Global. So I believe you've recruited, well, lots of BAs in the past and have that experience of being a sort of recruitment consultant, helping match up the right people to the right roles, providing advice along the way as well. So thank you both very much for being here. Now, if you're tuning in live, please do type your questions in the Q&A in the chat panel, and we will answer as many of them as we can. And as those of you who have been on these webinars before will know, there's one additional thing I just want to quickly show you. Let me just get my screen ready, because if you're attending live, you'll also be able to contribute towards the shared Jamboard. So if you've not seen this before, what it is, it's just, well, a Google Jamboard. So there's sort of virtual post-it notes. And what you can do is you can literally type in your thoughts about the topics, the key themes that you see that are emerging. So what I'm going to do in just a second, you add them, by the way, by clicking on the little post-it note, and you can choose the color and you can drag them around into themes and do whatever you like. All I'd ask is don't ask questions on the Jamboard. Use the Q&A panel for that. So I am just now going to type the URL for that Jamboard into the chat window. So if you're attending live, that will be in the chat window now. You can click on it, you can add your thoughts as we go along. So, okay, so let's get started. So I wanted to start by talking about the emotional response to redundancy. And I can still remember being put at risk of redundancy for an organisation. I can remember the room I was in. I can remember the seat I was sitting in. I can remember the words that were said, and I can remember the feeling of dread. So, I mean, Michelle, I'll put this first question to you, but how would you say, how can we get over, because it's very easy to get into a bit of a doom loop in that regard. Have you any advice or thoughts about that emotional response?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I think probably the first thing that I would say is to allow yourself to have an emotional response. You know, as business analysts, I'm sure we're all familiar with the Sarah model, you know, the change curve. And actually, you know, very often we can spot it in our own responses. So just, you know, just look at your own reactions and look at your own responses and kind of think, actually, is this just me going through that change curve? That's a really normal thing. So kind of don't beat yourself up too much. I would say. And I think the other thing that I would really stress, because from having been on both sides of redundancy, so I've been made redundant myself, plus sadly I've also had to make business analysts redundant. And so from the experience that I've had of working through a consultation period and sort of choosing who goes and who stays, it really isn't personal. It's very structured. It's a very structured process. It's very objective. So I think that, I would absolutely stress not to take it personally. Roles are made redundant, not people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And the Sarah curve, of course, if anyone listening isn't aware of it, is shock, anger, rejection, acceptance, hope. There are various flavors of it, like the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, and it is sort of a form of, I guess it's a form of grieving in a way, isn't it? It's grieving a role. So, Simon, from your experience of working with people who have perhaps been made redundant and are going through that emotional response, is there anything you'd add?
I think, well, firstly, to echo what Michelle said, I think it's sometimes you can take it very, very personally, and I think it's critical to acknowledge that it's the job that's being made redundant and not you as a person. And I think secondly, it is, I guess it's knowing your own strengths and weaknesses when you're faced with any type of crisis, because ultimately, there's a real importance that people hold against their career and their job, and something that ultimately they've strived and worked really hard to get towards. So it's only natural to have a response which at times can be really crushing. But I think the importance is how you, and to reiterate the title of the webinar today is how you bounce back from that, and what provisions you can put in place that they're going to set you up better than others around you. Because especially within the current crisis that we're in, companies might have had redundancies for a multitude of different reasons, outsourcing being a common one over many years. But there's a real sense of everyone's in the same situation with this. That can also create different worries about an overcrowded market, etc., which we'll get onto next. But I think it is all about how you prepare yourself to bounce back from things, but to allow yourself to have that emotional response, because you only learn from what you allow to happen. And I think if you try and bottle that and not express that, you're in danger of not learning or going through the process, which everyone needs to do in order to better themselves.
That's really interesting. So something I picked up that Michelle said, and you echoed there, Simon, was that need to actually have the response and accept that it is unexpected, it's a shock. And it's interesting, isn't it? And I don't know if this is a bit of a British thing, maybe it's different in different cultures, but there's sort of a keep calm, carry on, let's be really stoic about it, don't show any emotion, don't be human, act like an objective robot. Whereas actually, like, it is, it's a really emotional, because there's you start to think about how you're going to pay the mortgage or whatever. So actually, but also what I'm taking from what you're saying there, Simon, is have that response, but then channel it into the energy, which is, and what now? Yeah. So, and how can I be best placed to execute on that what now?
Absolutely. And I think, the best way to, I'm a firm believer that, your thoughts and what you allow to happen, ultimately they become you. So, if you're allowing certain thoughts to creep in, negativity will become you. So, if you are harboring all this negativity and you don't allow it to get out in one form or another, it might be a chat to a colleague, it might be a chat to your parents or an old boss. I think getting that negative energy off your chest is really important. But then how you can then flip that around, the positive message is what is, or the positive attitude is what's going to get you the your next role and your next career move. I think it's really important that you're able to to express that negativity in a way that's not out in the open, to be able to do that. But then the attitude that you then move forward with is a positive one, and I think the best thing that the majority of people will have in this webinar is an analytical thought set, obviously, which will enable them to plan their response. It may be some other people or some other specialisms don't have that advantage.
That's very true, and it is interesting, because again, from echoing or building from a point there, Simon, about having that emotional response, but having it in the appropriate place, really. You know, it's probably not one to go and, you know, however we might feel about our employer at that moment of time, having a LinkedIn blast is probably not the longer, you know, for the long term, probably not the best sort of thing to do. So okay, so let's think about immediate practical next steps. Let's imagine someone's in that situation, they've been made redundant, they are going through that turmoil. Like, what should they do? So, I mean, Simon, what would you recommend in the sort of immediate next steps?
Well, I think the first thing to do, and some people will be lucky enough to have this, and unfortunately not everyone will, but sometimes I think asking the questions of what your current employer can do to support your exit, that's not a question or a situation which is evaluated enough. You know, a lot of companies will have, you know, consultancy outreaches that they can be in touch with, that can, you know, sort of plan career advice to support you in that aspect. I feel that's probably the first step, that whilst you've got the opportunity, whilst you're still technically employed by them, that not a lot of people take advantage of. I think the second step is to allow yourself to evaluate your current role and what you've enjoyed from it, and therefore then where your focus should next be. I think we've all been in positions where we will compare them naturally as human beings to positions that we've previously had, and, you know, what is better about this job in comparison to the one you've had before, or what aren't you getting out of this job that you thought you might have done. I think it's really important that all of those things are evaluated before you then position yourself out into the market, because the worst thing that you could do, and I know that it happens, and I know that it's very easy to do, is to hit that application button 100 times and you know, fan yourself out there without any consideration. But I think it's still really important to have a profile in mind of a role that you're aiming for, something that you're achieving to do. This is still your career. It's still really important. And whilst there is a sense of desperation at times because of, you know, paying mortgage bills, etc., there is still an importance and a self-importance that you should hold against yourself for that. So I think still plan what you want to do, and then from that point onwards, then there is then the design of how you market yourself. So, you know, there will be a CV that you will need to prepare. There will be, in this day and age, there will be a heightened social media presence that you need to improve on. And for me, I think a lot of employers always used to advise not having as much information on a social media profile in comparison to your CV. I would actually really disagree against that, because the amount of people now that are sourcing or trying to attract talent via LinkedIn is unlike ever before, and ultimately, you know, that's a platform for you to be able to promote yourself. So I think those key things, CVs, I know that we're going to touch upon them in a little bit more detail later, but I think getting that CV and getting a representation of you that you feel is comfortable is critical as well. I know that we're going to touch on it in more detail later, so I'll save going into any more detail there. But I think those points are really critical for you to evaluate firstly.
Definitely, and it's interesting because, again, as you were speaking there, Simon, about planning, I was thinking, I heard someone I know recently use the expression that they were using the opportunity to reset their sat nav. And I thought that was a really interesting analogy, because I thought it is really tempting, isn't it, to just keep going. But actually, you know, I mean, perhaps somebody else has chosen the timing, but it's a time when we're going to change employer. And, you know, if you were going to change employer, you'd think about it a lot. There might be more of a time pressure because of constraints, but we should still go through that thinking process. And then that element of marketing as well, with the CV and the social media. So, Michelle, what would you add to that?
I think, as Simon said, it is a great opportunity to think about what's important to you, what kind of role are you looking for, what do you like to do, what don't you like to do. So do have a think about that. Think about what motivates you. But of course, all of that's fine as long as you can pay the bills.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't, then you're in a somewhat of a different situation. One thing I would sort of say is don't be too desperate. even if you are desperate, try not to look too desperate. So, I mean, one of the things that I see, I do a lot of hiring where I am at the moment, and one of the things that I see is that around 30% of direct candidates that I have apply for more than one role with my organisation. So they're just hitting the button multiple times. And as soon as I see that, it tells me that the candidate is not particularly committed to the business analyst role. They're just looking for anything.
Yeah.
So you need to be a bit careful. Again, on LinkedIn, I saw a sort of a whole stream of posts from somebody that I'd worked with previously, and over the weeks, you know, this colleague had been made redundant. Over the weeks, he became more and more desperate. And actually, it was quite distracting, and it was, you know, I really felt for him, but I just thought, oh, you know, you don't want to be putting those desperate feelings out into the marketplace. You know, you want to be coming from a position of strength, if you possibly can. So I think, you know, be careful about who you share your desperation with, as Simon said, and you know, that can be hard, because if you're the breadwinner,
yeah,
you know, you're also in the position where you're having to say to your partner, your children, whoever, you know, don't worry, it will be fine. You're having to reassure them. So, as Simon quite rightly said, you need an outlet. You need somebody that you can go, oh my God, what if I don't get a job? You have to be able to say those things. So, so make sure you have that person that you can say that to. One of the other things that I would say to start thinking about is, what's your brand? You know, so I know that we'll look at sort of CVs in a bit, but we've mentioned LinkedIn. You know, actually, if I were to look at your CV, and if I were to look at your LinkedIn profile and maybe some of your other social media profiles, actually, would I have a consistent kind of picture of who you are? And I think that sort of audit yourself, if you like, Google yourself. Actually, what's your brand that's out there? What are other people going to see? And one of the most useful things that I did, probably about 6 months ago, I worked with two colleagues, and we actually looked at our LinkedIn profiles together and said, actually, you know, when you read that description, does that sound like me? And my colleague said, well, it doesn't sound like you at all. And I was like, oh, I was really shocked. And so actually using feedback, if you are still in work, or if you've got a network, get other people to read your LinkedIn profile and say, you know, am I coming across there? Because very often we can kind of almost we're so bland that our personalities get lost along the way.
Yeah.
And you know, and particularly colleagues are really great at this, because actually, you know, we've all worked together, we've gone through projects together. They know your professional self really well. So let them give you advice so that you can make sure that your professional self comes over.
Yeah.
I think that community bubble as well, you know, that sort of sounding boards, they can
definitely,
they can do multiple things. They can be those people that you go for to sort of get that bit of negativity off your chest. But I think typically, you know, there are certain type of people, introverts that are amongst us that are scared of asking for help or self-promotion sometimes. You know, for me, Michelle, that's a great example of getting someone to read your LinkedIn profile, but also having people that will do simple things like your LinkedIn posts that you're posting. You know, just little things like that can make such a difference. You know, we all like to think that we've either got an incredibly strong network or one that's not good enough. Now, if you've got 5 or 6, 7 people that are part of a community bubble, you've got the same skill set, you can have some of their network just by little things like liking posts and messaging and you know, introducing people. There's so many simple things that can be done by a little community hub like that I feel is just worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, I completely agree, Simon, and I think sort of bouncing off of that, and from the sort of points that Michelle was making, I think there is, I mean, well, certainly I've found in the BA community, it's a very selfless community. You know, people will give without any expectation of ever getting anything back, just because we're all, and it probably comes back to the identity. We all sort of feel like we're BAs and we're in it together, and there should be no shame in asking for, you know, someone to like a post or to help with things like that. And Michelle, when you were speaking about LinkedIn profiles, it was reminding me of, so I mean, you know, I'm very fortunate. I'm not redundant. I do have a job, but someone a while back essentially said to me, Adrian, your social media profiles do not represent your personality whatsoever. You know, you're scowling and you're not normally a scowly person. And I sort of said, okay, because I'd had a professional photo taken and I looked professional, but I've recently I had my photos redone, and the comments have been, it's like all of a sudden people have come out and said, yeah, that's much more like you. And I'm thinking, we should have told me that a couple of years ago when I changed my photo to this secret thing. So even actually on that, I mean, well, Michelle or Simon, whoever wants to jump in on this, how important would you say things like photos are on LinkedIn? Do you pay attention to them?
Not so much, to be perfectly honest, because I think these days, I know a few years ago it was all the rage to add your photograph to your CV, and actually these days it's going very much the other way. That organisations are really moving more towards sort of blind screening of candidates because of all of that sort of unconscious bias. So these days, it's much more about actually knowing much less about the candidate before you do that initial screening. So I would say don't put your photograph on your CV. I have to say personally, I'm probably very, very odd, but I don't look at candidates' social media profiles because I think that actually they're entitled to have their private lives.
Yeah.
But I know I'm quite unusual, and I know that a lot of people, a lot of hiring managers and recruiters will be looking at your LinkedIn profile and whatever else you've put out there. Which
could be quite dangerous if it's
yes.
So and on that, just building on that thought, Simon, either on the photo element, but also on, like, because I would imagine that in the English-speaking world, LinkedIn would be the platform. I know in the German-speaking world, Xing seems to be bigger. I gather Xing is bigger than LinkedIn. But like for professional networking purposes, is it like LinkedIn is it, or are there other networks we ought to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different community hubs that people can take advantage of, and not just unique to business analysts. There are various different platforms that are out there for different specialisms. I think there are still some unique events like this that are popping up, and my response is that people should still to continue questioning what they can get out of these events, and putting their focus towards events that the IIBA will run, or these or individual pop-up events that are going on, and there's many different ones that I know that you've got planned, Adrian, as well. So that there are still lots of advantages for people to be to get this information and to garner, whether it be confidence or a sort of a bit of self-reflection that people need sometimes by listening to others. So there are multiple events, but as I said, everyone has their own personal brand, and different things will suit different people better. So I think that there is an element of trial and error to these events, and seeing what you get out from them, to do that. But I absolutely encourage people to try and seek more from their job search than simply writing a CV and posting it away. I don't think that works. The photo element is it's an issue that will never go away, I think, and it probably goes through trends and cycles. Seeing a smiley face on LinkedIn will do absolutely no harm to anybody. But is it the most important thing that you should be focusing on? Absolutely not. The level of detail and the language that you're using, making sure that language, as Michelle said, sounds like you, but is also appealing to the reader. And I think that's what the focus needs to be on. It is the person that your profile or your CV is it for the person that's intended to. Is it getting their attention? Is it keeping their attention? Those are the most important things to focus on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As you were speaking there, Simon, a quote popped up in my head from Steve Martin, of all people, like the comedian Steve Martin. A while ago, I read his autobiography, which is called Born Standing Up, which, anyway, fascinating book. But one of the things he said in there is he said when he was becoming a comedian, a lot of fellow comedians, his peers, were spending so much time on their publicity shots and their backgrounds. And he said his philosophy was just be so good they can't ignore you. Actually, if you just communicate your worth, it doesn't matter. None of all of these things are peripheral, but you can spend so much time on the periphery, like the photograph. So interesting. Okay, so we've got some live questions coming in, so we'll cover off some of these now. So the first one is from Helen. And it's a Helen that we both know, Michelle. It says, "Hi, Michelle, Adrian, little Helen here. Sometimes it's an opportunity to review the existing skills you have and how they can be transferable within the market. Which phase of the Sarah model would you pitch that at?"
Oh, thanks, Helen. that's a stinker. So I would put that probably in the hope section of the Sarah model, because by that time, actually, that's all about looking forward, and that's, particularly looking at transferable skills. That sort of really got you sort of out of your box, if you like, because you're not only thinking about getting another job and perhaps being another BA role, but also you're starting to look at the possibilities of other roles as well. So I would definitely put that in the hope section. But also I would say that that's something that BAs very rarely do. Sometimes we pigeonhole ourselves, and realistically we have this huge transferable skill set that makes us suitable for so many different roles. So don't just pigeonhole yourself into looking at other BA roles. Cast your net more widely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still feel that there's an element of the sort of acceptance there as well. What are you good at? And pushing that forward into hope as well.
Definitely. Okay, so our next question comes from Nefra. And Nefra says, what are your recommendations for best practices and processes for an organisation so that instead of causing massive ill will when redundancies have to happen, people feel better cared for and more enabled to move forwards and see the opportunities instead of the failures? In effect, how do we design a process that we would appreciate having be applied to us if we were made redundant? I think that's a cracking question.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant, and I think, to be honest, I think it's way beyond a process, and I think it's very much about the culture of the organisation. So it starts way before the talk of consultation periods or redundancies start. And I think for me that what is really key is that people understand why.
Yeah.
And I think because as business analysts, we're all commercially aware. We understand how organisations work. We understand the wider commercial environment. So nobody should be better placed than a business analyst to understand the business rationale that's led to the organisation to make the decision. So I think if that why isn't clear, then that's a really bad start. So I would say, first of all, within the organisation, actually, do your people know how your business is doing? How are the financial results of the organisation communicated to all of the staff, not just the business analysts? And then, of course, once there is a consultation process or once redundancies happen, there's a very strict process that organisations have to follow. But I think it's very important that process is humane.
Yes.
Because, actually, we might be dealing with, and I said earlier, it's roles that are made redundant, not people. But actually, it's the impact is on the people.
Yes.
And on the individuals, and we all have different things which are important to us. We all have different obligations and different opportunities. So I think it's about saying to organisations, stay within that legal process because you have to, but also think about how you can make that more human. What are the touches that you can put in place so that people are supported through that process, and beyond, because whenever people leave an organisation, they go out into the marketplace, and I always would want to send out ambassadors into the marketplace. You don't want to be putting out, people who don't have a good word to say about your organisation, because as we all know, the world of business analysis actually is quite a small one. business analysts all know business analysts, so
Yeah.
if you send out, if you give somebody a bad experience and they go out with a bad story to tell, actually word is going to get around pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So
That's interesting, isn't it? And as you were speaking then, Michelle, I was thinking, well, actually there's, as BAs, we talk about customer journey mapping, and we talk about welcoming the customer and, servicing the customer and farewelling the customer. There's a whole life cycle. Actually, there's an employee journey as well.
Absolutely.
And redundancy doesn't, this is the other element that we shouldn't forget, I suppose. I remember once a colleague I was working with was made redundant. I was like, oh, well, how do I speak to them? I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I broached it with them and they said, oh no, it's brilliant news. Like, I was going to retire in 3 years. I now get a payout and I can take early retirement. Like, why, so it isn't bad for everyone. So, I guess having that human element with our colleagues as well, if they're affected, is important. So, okay, at that juncture, I'm going to do the terrifying thing of bringing the Jamboard back on screen. And I'm literally just going to share it. I haven't had a chance to see what's on it yet. So this is always absolutely terrifying to see what people are writing. Hopefully nothing too scandalous. So,
it's loads.
Lots of post-it notes being thrown in. If you joined a bit late and didn't get the link, I will put the link in the chat again in a second. So we've got a smiley photo on LinkedIn. Won't do any harm, but isn't the most important thing. We've got the shock. The R is usually rejection. I probably said realization. I always do. I have a mental block with the R, but yes, it is normally rejection. People usually go through the SARA model 3 times. Interesting. I can sort of see that. Don't bottle things up. So there's a lot about the emotional response, getting clear on the support, LinkedIn. Yeah, lots of really good stuff. This is great stuff. So fantastic. Well, thank you to those of you that are putting stuff onto the Jamboard. I will just put that link in the chat again. So if you attended a little bit later, you can click on it and see it. So there are more questions flooding in, but before we get to those, I want to move on and talk about 2 topics, one of which is probably more controversial than the other. CVs and recruitment consultants. And I say recruitment consultants because go on LinkedIn, and if you want to get a LinkedIn post shared, just bash a recruiter seems to be the way of doing it, which is very unfair in many cases. So, Simon, CV tips for someone who's perhaps, someone who might have been in the same role 10 years, probably hasn't dusted off their CV for 5.
I think CVs have moved on considerably, more so in the last 10 years than arguably what they did for the previous 20, 30. It's no longer a document that says what you were responsible for doing. I think many people fall into the trap of creating a CV that is based around a job description. Now, for me, and one of the big things that will really enable business analysts to set their stall up and be confident in who they are is, what are the quantifiable and qualitative examples that sets you apart from everyone else? Not just what you did, how you did it, and what were the outcomes and successes of those actions. And that for me, I don't see, or certainly when I was a recruitment consultant, I never saw enough examples of that. And yes, there's an element of that you want to be able to speak to people and meet them to draw out that information. But we have to remember that this document, this CV, is a representation of you. And I said it earlier, it's about capturing someone's attention. But importantly, the thing that people don't do as well is keep their attention whilst reading that document. What makes you go from reading their opening statement to some of the small elements of their role to wanting for someone to keep on reading? That hiring manager, what is going to want them to keep on reading? And importantly, bring a smile to their face when they're reading it. Give them every reason not to invite you to an interview. there is things in the CVs that are around, as I said, the quantitative and qualitative examples, but there are also lots of other things that tend to be missing from a CV. Just simple things like, I would never just mention such and such a system. Name the system. What does it do? What's its purpose? Because sometimes your audience, sometimes not always business analysts hire for other business analysts. Sometimes a technical manager might be seeking a BA, and they might need someone to explain during that CV, during that small window in that CV, what's the actual purpose? What was that project doing? And that for me doesn't happen enough. It tends to be just a list of responsibilities or accountabilities, and that for me in this day and age, it's not enough.
Yeah. Michelle, what was your view on CVs? And actually, just before you answer, I'll bring in a question that's been asked by Rushma. I hope I'm saying your name right, Rushma. But Rushma asks, what are your thoughts on having different versions of your CV? I'm a BA with over 17 years BA experience working on a range of projects. A recruitment consultant recently suggested I should have 3 versions of my CV that sell my skills as 1, a BA, 2, CRM expertise, and 3, agile expertise. Should I have 1 CV covering all of these areas or 3 separate ones?
That's a really good question, actually, and I think I guess it very much depends on what kind of job you're looking for. But I think going back to what we were saying earlier about having a brand, if there are multiple different versions of you out there in the marketplace, that can be quite hard to manage. So actually, what's getting lost somewhere along the line? Because what you don't want to happen is for somebody to see sort of 2 different versions of you, because then all of a sudden are you still credible as a candidate? So I think if you can get everything into 1 CV, that would be my preference. And inevitably you have to compromise in terms of what you can get in there. But again, I think with your CV, try, if you're looking for a CRM role, then kind of enhance those areas on your CV. If you're looking for a BA role, then make it very business analyst focused. So if you can afford to sort of make choices and look for your preferred role, then tailor your CV according to that. But I think generally speaking, I mean, I probably over the last 12 months, I've probably reviewed over 1,000 CVs.
Wow.
I know. So I've been doing quite a lot of recruitment. I've been looking at lots and lots of CVs, and I have to say they are an incredibly unreliable indicator.
Yeah.
So the first thing I will say, and this sounds really, I can't even believe I have to say this, only put on your CV things you can do.
Oh no, I could.
Yeah, rocket science. I know, honestly, but I cannot tell you the number of candidates I have interviewed, and I have asked them about techniques that they have included on their CV, and they cannot answer questions about them. Like, why would you even do that, really? So don't do that to yourself. So be honest. And make sure that your CV, do a bit of a sense check on it. So I know that we sometimes, when you have sort of help when you're being made redundant, you work with sort of consultants, outplacement consultants, and they say, well, your CV should never be more than 2 pages. And I think that's really it's quite old fashioned. But equally, I've seen some CVs that are 18 pages. Yeah. And also make sure it makes sense. Very often, what you can find is that I've seen lots and lots of CVs where a candidate will say that they've worked on a project from initiation and they've worked all the way through the whole life cycle, and they detail all of the things that they've done. And then I look at how long they were at that organisation. It was 6 months. And I think, well, that must have been a really small project then if you did the whole thing in 6 months. So that doesn't stack up. But I think, for me, one of the other things that I would say is, I don't think it's your CV's job to sell you. I think it's your job to sell you. So I would never send anybody my CV without having spoken to them. And again, I think if you scattergun, and if all you're doing is pressing send or apply, clicking the apply button multiple times, actually, what sort of commitment are you showing to that role? So when I was looking for a job after being made redundant, I wouldn't dream of applying for a job without first having spoken to either the recruitment manager, the hiring manager, if it was a direct role, or the recruitment consultant. So I want somebody to be looking for my CV before I send it through. And in actual fact, by doing that, I ended up never applying for any job through an online job site, because I always got the email address of the person who was dealing with the application, so that I sent it to them direct. So I would really, you want to be memorable. And actually, if you haven't spoken to anybody, that's really difficult. So, actually get your networking skills, get your stakeholder management skills out. You want that recruitment consultant or that hiring manager to be actively looking out for your CV, so that actually when your CV does arrive, actually half of its work has been done for it.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because again, I was thinking as you were speaking there, Michelle, that really builds upon Simon's earlier point of engaging with networks like, say, IIBA branches. And of course, in a non-COVID world, there'd be physical meetups, but now there are virtual meetups. And actually, you know what it's like. Now, of course, there are proper due processes, as there should be in all organisations. But if you've met the person, well, they know you. There's a face to it. When they see the CV, they're like, oh, okay, that's that person. And actually, I spoke to them, and this seems like, this doesn't seem made up. It seems consistent with what I've seen. So that element of networking. So I want to bring in just another couple of questions here that have come in live, and I'll put this to both of you. So Tim asks, and these are two related questions, but Tim asks, how important are BA qualifications to getting interviews and securing a new role, and which qualifications add most value with respect to finding new work? And Hertje asks a very similar question. She asks, hi, very interesting subject. On the subject of CVs, how important are your diplomas? The one from school, if you have been in business analysis for many years, and on the other hand, how important are certificates like IIBA, so CBAP, CCBA, or whatever, or the BCS certificates and diploma? So certification, diploma, qualifications, who wants that one?
I will start, and no doubt Michelle will be able to add some more to it. For me, it's what's relative, and sorry to go back to the previous question, but there is no harm in having a blueprint on your CV and putting emphasis on other particular points, but that will only come from what you understand about the role. So yes, reaching out to people and engaging is where you'll get that information. What's relative? Are your school qualifications relative if you have a 20-25 year business analysis career? No. And this is why you end up seeing people's CVs that are perhaps 15-20 pages long sometimes, which, for all of us that read through these, it does. There's a feeling in the pit of your stomach when you see page 1 of 20, when that CV comes up, that is undescribable. It's about keeping it relative. So the same thing, if you started off as a software engineer, if you started off as a tester, is it important to include that in your CV so people can see the journey? Yes. But do you need to put so much information and emphasis on that as what you do for your last five years? No, because the chances are that the last 5 years of your career will get you the opportunity to meet that manager and to meet and to get the role that you're now seeking and applying for. Different organizations will have different opinions on the role of a business analyst in comparison to others, because people need different things from their analysts. In some organizations, they will have someone doing an analysis job, but they will be afraid to call it a business analyst. Mm-hmm. So for those organizations, do they want to see a BCS or a CBAP qualification? They won't, because it's not important to them. However, with other organizations, it's really critical that people not only just rely on their experience, because that experience needs to be tied in sometimes and nurtured with a process. And you get those processes by the CBAP and the BCS qualifications. And for me, it really depends on who you're marketing yourself towards. Mm-hmm. A software house that's looking for a BA proxy product owner will put less importance on the CBAP and the BCS qualifications than maybe Michelle will answer this, maybe than what Michelle does when she hires for Close Brothers, because it is slightly more about bound processes, and they do still have agile ways of working, but you get those from other experiences and other qualifications. So they are still important. I would encourage anyone that feels that if they could become a better business analyst by doing those qualifications to actively seek it out. You certainly don't lose anything by going through the process, I don't feel. And ultimately, like I said, it's how you're marketing yourself. Are those qualifications important for the roles that you're going for? Certain industries place much more reliance on them than others.
Michelle, what would you add to that?
Well, as a hiring manager, I have to say, I'm interested in development more than certification. So in actual fact, one of the things that I have done since I've been at Close Brothers is to remove the requirement on role profiles for a degree, because I've said, actually, I know loads of fabulous business analysts who don't have a degree. So actually, we want our roles to be as inclusive as possible. So actually, I'm a big believer in that. Don't ask for things you don't need. So I don't ask for academic qualifications, and I don't ask for professional qualifications. However, when I am reviewing CVs, what I'm really interested in is how is this candidate developing themselves? How are they owning their own development? So I might see one candidate who has the full BCS diploma, which is marvellous. That's great. But actually, if I can look and if that diploma has been entirely provided by the previous organisation or by a number of organisations, I'm kind of like, okay, great. It's still great to have. If I see somebody has maybe done one module and they've self-studied, or maybe they've done it with a study group, or I can see that they're an active member of the IIBA, or they attend industry events, that to me speaks much more strongly of somebody who is taking an interest in their own development and is owning it. So that's some of the things that I look for is how engaged is this person with the BA profession overall. And I'm not just looking for exam certificates or somebody to tick a box. I'm really lucky that I work with a fabulous team of business analysts who absolutely are passionate about business analysis, and that's the kind of candidates that I look for. People who are going to share our passion. And very often I've seen lots and lots of candidates who have had, they've got no professional certification. That's okay. They don't engage with the profession at all. There's no evidence of continuing professional development on their CV, and yet the first question they ask me when I'm interviewing is, what training are you going to give me? And actually that's a real turn off. Because I'm like, so if you don't take your own development seriously, why would I?
Absolutely. And that's sort of, it's very much what can you give me before you go in through the door type of question. So
exactly.
So it's about that broad development, about showing the commitment to the profession, and that could be formal, it could be informal, it could be volunteering with IIBA,
definitely, yeah.
Wherever you are in the world, there are chapters of IIBA who are always looking for volunteers. So I just want to briefly pivot the conversation very, very briefly to the more sometimes more controversial topic of recruitment consultancies. And I'm just going to ask the question and then retreat to a safe distance. If someone is looking for a good recruitment consultant, if we accept that there is a spectrum of consultancies out there that act in different ways and provide different services, how do they find the right one or the right ones for them? And should it be the right one, or should it be the right ones, in your opinion? And whoever wants that one is welcome to that question.
Okay. Shall I go first on this one then, Simon? Because I know this is your area of expertise, so I'm going to get in there quick with my opinion. Yeah. So I think the first thing that I would say is that your network of really fabulous recruitment consultants ideally should be in place before you're a candidate. So if you are in a position that you're a hiring manager, the first thing I would say is, when those recruitment consultants ring you, however often they do ring you, make the time to speak to them, actually build the relationships with them. I mean, I have to say, Simon was a huge help to me when I was made redundant. And actually, we've never actually worked together, but we know each other very well because we spoke all the time. So, these relationships are really important. And if recruitment consultants are brilliant because they can tell you what's happening in the market. And that, as a candidate, that's really important. And if there is something coming up, you want to be the first to find out rather than seeing it on LinkedIn when everybody else sees it. So I think building relationships with recruitment consultants is critical. And really don't be too busy to take the call, because realistically, you never know when you're going to be a candidate. So Simon, over to you.
Yeah, I think that I always use the comparison of different service models that have improved over the years. I think to use the takeaway analogy, once upon a time we used to phone up a Chinese takeaway, or we used to go to the fish and chip shop on a Friday. Never in a million years would we ever have imagined ordering things on an app or engaging in different ways. And I think even the original app idea got turned down at Dragon's Den, I think, as well, because it wasn't perceived as an idea that would go anywhere. So what I ask for people to do when they look at that analogy is to concentrate on what service elements can be improved, and where are you applying your focus to this. There is a service model that is always constantly trying to improve. The ways that we pay for things now are far different to what we ever did before. So there are lots of different ways for you to communicate and to get your profile and your expectations for a role across to a recruiter or a hiring manager. And I think it's important in how you direct that. In terms of your relationship with a recruiter, I was one myself for a fair few years, and even then, to candidates that I knew and were extremely capable and could do a great thing for certain organisations. My previous bosses probably won't thank me for this, but I never ever advised just sticking with me. It was always really important. I felt that as a candidate, you were exposed to different recruiters who did their job in different ways, because the role of a recruitment consultant is advisory, but it is also sales. And sometimes people did the advisory part much better than the sales, and vice versa. So you need to get that right mix of someone. And when you're dealing with people that are recruitment consultants, they have their own different ways of doing things, and things sometimes have different results. I know that maybe I was able to pick up the phone to Michelle or other managers in ways that I knew my competitors weren't. And likewise, I was jealous of the relationships that they might have had with other organisations as well. So I would never settle for one. I would always get different people's understanding of what you do and different people that can market you. But it's important that you can place that element of trust with them. It doesn't have to be one of the big guys. It really doesn't, because a lot of I know some great startup recruitment companies that once upon a time were part of bigger organizations. They have removed themselves from those environments because they felt that they could do something in a slightly better way. So it is all about your relationships with that recruiter. And I would encourage everyone to build them, even in this day and age when maybe it could be argued that recruitment consultancies are seeing slightly less vacancies because of the situations that we're in. That time will change. I'm confident of that, and I'm confident that recruitment companies that I know and have worked for and rivals once upon a time will come out of this curve for the better. And I think it's you need to be able to engage with recruitment consultants. There is a strong purpose that they have in the market, but that shouldn't be a sole purpose. There shouldn't be a sole reliance on recruitment consultants. You also have a duty to market yourself, and that comes with LinkedIn. It comes with your networking sessions. It comes with understanding managers. It comes with getting those managers' email addresses directly that Michelle mentioned before, and reaching out to them and letting them know why you think. So there's multiple different ways to do this, but the recruitment consultant element to it is important, and I think that there has to be ways that you put trust in your recruitment consultant. It might be the old-fashioned way. It might be something new, but it will suit you as a person.
So get to know a few recruitment consultants, build trust, work with them, and keep that dialogue open. So we're nearly out of time. So I'm now going to go through as many remaining of the live questions as I can. And I'm going to ask you to give the shortest possible answers to all of these that you can. So I'm just going to throw a question at each of you randomly. So Andrew asks, what unique challenges do you foresee in a world where engagement and recruitment may be entirely remote? So Michelle, what would you say to that one? It's quite a big, that's probably an entire webinar of its own.
Yeah, it is. But I think at the same time, Andrew, I think actually we have all got so used to working remotely that none of us would be fazed now by the thought of doing an interview by Zoom. Yeah. So I think actually, for me, I wouldn't think it's an issue now, and I would, I would say, just remember to make sure your camera's on and you're not on mute.
Yeah, absolutely. Simone asks, and I think we've partially answered this, but it'd be good just to underline it. What are your thoughts on CV length? She was recently asked to, or advised to, reduce it to 2 pages. So Simon, CV length.
Yeah, I've never been one for a 2-page max. It is indicative of your own experience. Someone that's fresh into the market will have less purpose to have a full-page CV than someone who says has got 20 years. So it's indicative of your experience. I think personally you can lose someone if it is longer than 4. That's a personal opinion of mine. But should you be limiting it to 2? I don't think so, because I think by doing that, you are at risk of missing out some crucial information. You're not always at the luxury of knowing everything you need to about the role. So the role that you're applying for. So sometimes there is an element of being able to condense as much information in that, but not lose the message. And I think 4 pages is about right for that.
Fantastic. And then the final question we'll cover before we wrap up is from Rushma, who just asks, how should we show taking part in industry events in a CV? So which sort of section? So Michelle, where would you expect to see those sorts of things?
So towards the end of my CV, I have a kind of section on there, which is, sort of kind of academic qualifications, and then professional qualifications, if you have any. And then I have continuing professional development. And then maybe you can put a section on there about industry engagement or volunteering, something along that kind of thing, along that kind of line. And then just list the events that you've attended, or list out the things that you've done. So it depends on what your experience is. But for me, that's a really, really important part of your experience. It shows that you're really committed to the role. You're owning your own development, and you're an active sort of participant in the profession, and that speaks very strongly to what kind of candidate you are.
So fantastic. Well, we could talk about this for hours and hours, and I mean, we haven't even talked about interviews and so on yet, but we've covered the sort of some of the really important elements. So just before we close, this is probably the hardest question I'm going to ask each of you of the entire session, but it's like, if you had one piece of advice or one takeaway, or if there's one thing you want people to really remember from today's session, what would it be? So Simon, what one thing would you like people to take away from this session?
I personally think that the self-marketing is by far the most important thing, and probably the thing that people don't do as well as they can do sometimes. And I think that people need to reflect on that. What do they want from a job? Is their profile actually geared up to achieve that? And are they doing everything that they possibly can to get the right messages across, within sometimes a very short window of time. You know, a CV, as we said, can only be so long. A LinkedIn page can only include so much information. So are you directing the right information to the right people in the right way with the right language? Those are the things that I would plead for people to invest time in.
Fantastic, excellent advice there. And Michelle, what would your key takeaway be?
I would say, first of all, choose carefully, you know, so think about what you want, because nobody else can tell you that. So, you know, so be clear about what you want, and then rather than go out there and be scattergun, really focus on the opportunities that really interest you and that speak to you, and absolutely work really hard on those roles which are really important to you. You know, I think, you know, when I saw my current role, when I saw the advert on LinkedIn, I just looked at it and thought, actually, that's the job I want. And I have to say, I was practically stalking the hiring manager. You know, I mean, you know, so you know, so I was leaving her messages all over the place, tracking it down, messaging on LinkedIn, because actually I knew that was the job that I wanted.
Yeah.
You know, and actually, so commit to a role. Actually, as I say, sometimes if you apply for too many, actually your commitment, it just doesn't show. So choose carefully.
And the energy, you can't physically, your energy is split between the hundreds.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So fantastic. Well, Michelle, Simon, thank you so much for taking time for this conversation. I mean, I just know from the number of people that have registered, the number of questions that we've had, and I'm looking at the sticky notes on the Jamboard, they're still going. I mean, it's just, there's so much, people have clearly found this so valuable. So thank you so much for taking the time out, you know, of your busy schedules to be here. Really, really appreciate it. And for everyone that's tuned in live, a massive thank you for coming along, for putting your sticky notes on the Jamboard. Just before we close, just a few final messages. So after the session, you will get an email with a link. And in fact, I'm going to put the links in the chat as well now. So the first is a feedback form. So always really, really good to know what you've enjoyed, what we should change about the format of the webinars, and also topics that you're looking for. And pretty much all of or a lot of the recent topics have been suggestions that people have put in the feedback form. So if there's stuff you want to see, put it in. And if I can find people to speak to us about it, then I'll make it happen. Equally, a few people have been even braver and have said, I think this would be a great topic and I'd like to talk about it. Again, if you've got a topic you want to talk about on a future webinar, please do that, and we will absolutely make it happen. Sometimes people ask me, do you have to be a professional speaker to be on a webinar? My response to that is always, what is a professional speaker? I'm not sure that sort of thing exists, but the answer is no.
If
there is an answer to that, it's no. Also, there are a number of webinars coming up. The one next week is actually about a topic that Michelle's spoken about in passing. So I put the link in the webinar. It's about upping your professional development by starting a business book club. And, you know, they say that the average CEO reads so many books a year or whatever. And if you're anything like me, I have lots of intentions to read lots of good books, but unless I'm, you know, if I have the shared commitment of knowing I'm going to meet with people to discuss it, that means that I actually do read it. So the registration link's in the comments there as well, and you can you'll get an email with that on there as well. So all that's left for me to say is a massive thank you again, Michelle. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully see you somewhere in the physical world soon.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.